I have a confession to make. I have never read or watched any Twilight content. Like, I can honestly not even really tell you what Twilight is about, except vampires and werewolves, maybe? I don't know how it happened, but I just fully missed the Twilight hype when I was a child, and ever since I've just never come in contact with Twilight. I have accidentally avoided any spoilers. I know nothing about this series. I have never seen one of the movies. I have never read any of the books. I have probably maybe seen like some compilation videos when I was 12, but I have no memory of them. So I am now 24 years old. I thought it was about time that I read and watch the Twilight series for the first time ever. Creepy, even for a vampire. Like that's too far. His last name is Black. Oh my god, if they're gonna be together, it's like Black Swan. You don't care if I'm a monster, if I'm not human. My permission to eat me alive? I could reach out, meaning to touch your face and crush your skull by mistake. She's known this man for like 6 weeks. I haven't even read the back of this book. I am going to tell you what I know. I know the main character is called Bella. I know that she is in a love triangle with the boys. What are they called? Edward? Jacob and Edward. Oh my god, that took way too long. This is showing you how little I know. Okay, so Jacob and Edward, are they brothers? I think they might be brothers, but I also think one of them is a vampire and the other one is a werewolf. So I don't know if they are brothers. Maybe I made that up. That is all I know. That is all I know. I think maybe she gets pregnant at some point. Let me read the back of this. About 3 things I was absolutely positive. First, Edward was a vampire. Okay, well, that much I knew. Fair warning, this is going to be a full spoiler video. I am going to talk about every single detail. Let's get started. Oh, I'm so excited. The sun is about to go down, so I decided to sit on my balcony. I have some tea and my book. How many pages is this? Oh, it's long. I mean, 430 pages. Okay, I've read the first chapter. I honestly thought that I would hate the way it was written. Like, I expected it to be just like very terribly written. The descriptions and like the writing style is actually pretty enjoyable. So I'm not mad about that. So, I thought it was about time I would give you my first thoughts about Twilight. I made it to page 73, which is the beginning of chapter 5, and I made some notes to keep track of my thoughts. I did figure out that Edward and Jacob are not brothers, and that was something from the Vampire Diaries, I think, which is a show I saw when I was a child. So I think that's why I thought that they were brothers, because it was like, that's the only vampire kind of show that I've watched. So we start off the book with Bella, who moves from her mom's house to her dad's house in this like small town, and you don't really know why she does it. You only know that like she hates the rain, she hates the cold, and her dad's hometown is like really rainy and cold, and her mom lived in this like warm beach town. So you're like, okay, why did you move then? But then eventually you find out that she did it because her mom wanted to travel and she couldn't do that with her there. So she moved to like let her mom live her dream, which I guess is nice. So she moves into this new town with her dad in her dad's house where she's never lived, or not since she was like 2 years old or something. And then she goes to her new school and she meets like all these new people. And eventually she meets Edward. And she is incredibly like enthralled by Edward. She is immediately obsessed. And I think the thing that is bothering me the most right now about this book is that nothing is described if Edward is not in the scene. Like basically she met Edward on the first day of school, or she saw him for the first time, and then she goes to school for a week and a half. She is new in this town, she's new at this school, she doesn't know anything, we don't know anything about her yet, and the book just goes, I didn't see him for a week and a half until this and this day. We don't know anything about what happened in that week and a half because she didn't see Edward, so it doesn't matter. There is also 2 other boys incredibly obsessed with her, totally in love, so that makes sense. And then eventually there is a almost car crash and Edward saves her life. Then his hands moved so fast they blurred. One was suddenly gripping under the body of the van, and something was dragging me, swinging my legs around like a rags doll, until they hit the tire of the tan car. A groaning metallic thud hurt my ears, and the van settled, glass popping, onto the asphalt. Exactly where, a second ago, my legs had been. So the way he saves her from this car crash is a little bit suspicious because he was supposedly on the other side of the road. So he suddenly is like next to her saving her life, and we don't really know how that is possible. Also, his eye color keeps changing, so that is interesting. And then there's this dance, and for this dance, it's like one of those girls' choices dances where like the girls have to ask out the boys. But for some reason, Bella gets asked out by 2 or maybe even 3 different boys to this dance where the girls are supposed to ask the boys. Anyway, she doesn't want to go to this dance, and instead of just telling the people I don't want to go to this dance, she's like, I need to make other plans so that I have an excuse not to go to this dance. So she's like, I will go into Seattle, which is the nearest city, because I want to like buy books and new clothing, so that is a good excuse to go there. And then at the end of chapter 4, Edward is like, I heard you were going to Seattle. And she was like, yeah, so? And he's like, I also want to go to Seattle. What if we go together? After he just gave his whole speech about how they cannot be together and she has to accept why they cannot be friends. Anyway, that is where I ended off. So they are going to Seattle together, apparently. And also Edward is unsure about what he is supposed to do. I said it would be better if you weren't friends, not that I didn't want to be. Oh, thanks. Now that's all cleared up. It would be more prudent for you not to be my friend, he explained. But I'm tired of trying to stay away from you, Bella. Okay, well, we also have not met Jacob yet, so I don't know if that's in this book or in a different book or if that comes later, but we don't know who he is yet. Like I said, it's a better written book than I thought. I'm kind of enjoying myself, and I do have to say that like the way the chemistry between Bella and Edward is described, it really works. I can understand why if I was like 12, I would have been obsessed with them as a couple, because the way they talk to each other, you kind of get that like, that fan fiction feeling where you're like, oh my god, they're totally meant to be. Anyway, I am going to continue reading today. I have an incredibly fun day planned, so I'm going to take you along with me. I am about to go to Amsterdam and go see Olivia Rodrigo in concert. I'm so excited. So I'm going to get ready and read this on the train. currently at page 100. We've got a first mention of Jacob. I noticed a younger boy sitting up on the stones near the fire glance up at me in interest. The boy who noticed me was named Jacob. His last name is Black. Oh my god, if they're gonna be together, it's like Black Swan. This is probably, if you've read or seen Twilight, this is probably like a thing, but I just figured it out by myself. Okay, so she's flirting with Jacob to get information about Edward. You see, the cold ones, he hasn't explained what he means with the cold ones, but let's say vampires, are the natural enemies of the wolf. Well, not the wolf really, but the wolves that turn into men, like our ancestors. You would call them werewolves. Okay, we got some actual information, so let's go. So Bella asked Jacob why the Cullen family couldn't come on this beach trip, and Jacob's answer was this fairy tale story about cold ones and wolves. So he starts his story with, another legend claims that we descended from wolves and that the wolves are our brothers still. So that humans came from wolves, I guess. So he starts his story with talking about that humans possibly descend from wolves, and then he goes, then there are the stories about the cold ones. His voice dropped a little lower. There are stories of the cold ones as old as the wolf legends, and some much more recent. According to legend, my own great-grandfather knew some of them. And then he talks about how his great-grandfather apparently made a deal with the cold ones because they were supposed to be civilized and didn't kill humans. So he explains that these cold ones do not kill humans, but he does also say there's always a risk for humans to be around the cold ones, even if they're civilized like this clan was. You never know when they might get too hungry to resist. So how does it fit with the Cullens? Are they like the cold ones that your great-grandfather knew? And then Jacob goes, no. He paused dramatically. They are the same ones. Good morning, it is Wednesday today. For the past 2 days I have read quite a bit and I have some things to update you on. Got to the part where Edward actually admits to Bella that he is a vampire. So I'm going to take you through the last 2 chapters that I read to kind of give you some context. Because there is a dance going on, like a prom I think, at the school. Bella isn't going obviously, but her friends are, and they invited her to the city to go dress shopping. So she goes there with the friends, and then halfway through she's like, okay, I want to go to a bookstore, you go to whatever you're doing, I will meet you later. But that doesn't go well because she gets lost in the sketchy part of the city, and there's 4 men that follow her and then at some point corner her, and then suddenly Edward appears. And he wasn't even in this city. He hadn't been in school for the past couple of days. He didn't know that she was gonna be here. So he just comes out of nowhere and he rescues her from these 4 men. Anyway, they drive around this city for a while and then he is like, I am taking you to dinner. So they're going on this date. It's not really a date, he's like, you need to eat and get some sugar in you because you just had a very traumatic and scary experience. And she is like, I don't care about what just happened, I just care about what the fuck you're doing here. Because I didn't tell you I was gonna be here, you shouldn't know, and also how did you find me in this sketchy part of town where nobody else was? He doesn't really tell her outright, but she asks some questions and he just kind of answers the questions in a hypothetical sense, but obviously we're talking about them. So he tells her that he usually can hear people's thoughts, but he cannot hear Bella's. And he says, it's harder than it should be keeping track of you. Usually I can find someone very easily once I've heard their mind before. And then I heard what they were thinking. I saw your face in his mind, one of the men who followed her. So she's like, okay, you can hear everyone except me. That's strange. I decided it didn't matter, I whispered. It didn't matter? His tone made me look up. I had finally broken through his carefully composed mask. His face was incredulous, with just a hint of the anger that I'd feared. "No," I said. "It doesn't matter to me what you are." A hard, mocking edge entered his voice. "You don't care if I'm a monster, if I'm not human? No." And then we get the iconic scene that I didn't know I knew, but once I read it, I was like, yeah, I've heard this before, which is, "How old are you?" 17, he answered promptly. "How long have you been 17? His lips twitched as he stared at the road. "A while," he admitted. So we get this whole chapter, and in it we get a bunch of different revelations about Edward and the fact that he's a vampire. So I made a little list. I wrote down every single thing we discovered. So first, he can usually read minds, but just not Bella's. He doesn't sleep or age. He can use scent to follow people. He gets thirsty for blood, and then his eyes go darker. So the whole color changing eyes thing has to do with how recently he drank blood. He doesn't drink human blood. He goes for like animals with his family, but he is still tempted, and he really wants to drink Bella's blood. Whenever he is not around Bella, he gets anxious, but whenever Bella is not around Edward, she also gets anxious, so there's like a connection there probably. And he can be out during the day, but just not in direct sunlight. Whenever it's like a sunny day, he stays inside. And then the chapter ends with the iconic part about 3 things I was absolutely positive. First, Edward was a vampire. Second, there was part of him, and I didn't know how potent that part might be, that thirsted for my blood. And third, I was unconditionally and irrevocably in love with him. So I read a little bit more, but this is like the important things that happened. I am going to try to read a bunch more today, so hopefully I can give you some more updates. I'm glad that we know officially now, and we're getting more information about like how technically it works. And also I'm excited about the fact that Bella now knows, but they are choosing to be together anyway. Like, that's exciting. Anyway, I really enjoyed reading these chapters, so I am having a great time so far. And I'm excited to see what happens next. I am at page 175 right now, so I have still half of the book left. My little protector. Morning. It is Friday. It is just morning still. It's like 3 minutes before 12. I have a work from home day today, so I spent my morning just doing some freelance work on my computer, and I'm now taking my lunch break. And I just got to the part where Edward and Bella are taking their day trip. They were supposed to go to Seattle together, but then the sun was out, so Edward was like, can we go somewhere like, can I take you somewhere instead of Seattle? So I don't know where they're going, but I am excited to see them interact more. They've been like friendly together, like they're having lunch together every day and they drive to school together, but this is the first time they like intentionally met up, like they made plans to do something together. I do have to say, I think it's interesting that there was this big reveal about like the vampire thing, and now everything seems so normal. Like she doesn't really think about it at all. She just kind of like, I guess that's just who he is and I'm obsessed with him. So she also doesn't really try to like find out more. There's not really been any more information. We just kind of accepted that he's a vampire. Hello. I have a cup of chamomile tea, I have my book, and I have my favorite chocolate, and I have a night off. Hello, good evening. It is Sunday night and I promised to give you a bigger reading update today. I made it to page 300 yesterday. So when we last spoke, Edward and Bella were about to go on their Seattle trip, but it wasn't a Seattle trip because Edward was like, the sun is gonna be out, do you mind if I take you somewhere else? So they went somewhere else, we didn't know where. Oh, but before this, Jacob and his father showed up at Bella's house, and like Jacob's father is friends with Bella's father, so it did make sense a little bit, but it was very weird. But anyway, that was weird. Then they went on the Seattle trip. So it started with Edward picking Bella up at her house, and he was like, "Good morning," he chuckled. "What's wrong?" I glanced down to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything important, like shoes or pants. "We match." He laughed again. I realized he had a long light tan sweater on with a white collar showing underneath and blue jeans, which is exactly what she's wearing. So I was like, oh my god, they're so in sync. Edward takes her to this like patch of grass in the middle of like the woods where nobody can find them, and during the whole travel there they make so many jokes about killing her. Like he keeps kind of casually mentioning the fact that she might die on this trip, and she just keeps being like, I'm not afraid at all. And like, I get that she's supposed to feel very safe with him, but he keeps mentioning like, maybe you don't come home. And I would be like, well, if you say so, I trust you, but if you don't trust yourself, maybe I shouldn't trust you either. Anyway, he hinted at not being able to be in the sun publicly, which is why they went to this like forest part where the sun still shines but there's not people around. And the moment he goes into the sun, they describe it as his skin literally sparkled, like thousands of tiny diamonds were embedded in the surface, which is very cool and also a good reason to not be out. So like, he can be in the sun, but whenever he is, people obviously start asking questions. So they kind of admit their like feelings for each other, and it's not necessarily like love feelings, it's more of this weird pull to each other that they cannot deny, and they're like, oh my god, we are made for each other in some way. And she asks him if him or any of his family members have ever felt that way before. So Edward tells her that Emmett, his brother, has felt this way twice, one stronger than the other, and that he has never felt this way. And then she asks, what did Emmett do? It was the wrong question to ask. His face grew dark, his hand clenched into a fist inside mine. He looked away. I waited, but he wasn't going to answer. I guess I know, I finally said. Even the strongest of us fall off the wagon, don't we? What are you asking? My permission? My permission to eat me alive? So Emmett drank the blood of both these women that he was obsessed with, and Bella is just going to believe that Edward wouldn't do that to her. So then they discuss the first moment they met, because at the beginning of the book, obviously Edward was very rude to Bella, and she's like, why did that happen? And he's like, because I immediately was obsessed with you and I couldn't think about anything other than drinking your blood. I could have ruined everything Carlosol has built for us right then and there. If I hadn't been denying my thirst for the last, well, too many years, I wouldn't have been able to stop myself. To me, it was like you were some kind of demon, summoned straight from my own personal hell to ruin me. The fragrance coming off your skin, I thought it would make me deranged that first day. In that 1 hour, I thought of 100 different ways to lure you from the room with me, to get you alone. And I fought them each back, thinking of my family, what I could do to them. I had to run out to get away before I could speak the words that would make you follow. So then afterwards he tries to tell his adopted father, I guess, that he wants to leave, and then he just gets in a car and drives to Alaska. He's like, by the next morning I was in Alaska. I'm like, okay, well, great. Because he was like, this smell is too much, I cannot deal with this, I will come back when this mortal human is dead, and then I will not have to deal with this. But then once in Alaska, he was like, well, I guess this was a little bit of an overreaction, and he just comes back, and then the car accident happens. Of course, then you were nearly crushed to death in front of my eyes. Later, I thought of a perfectly good excuse for why I acted at that moment. Because if I hadn't saved you, if your blood had been spilled there in front of me, I don't think I could have stopped myself from exposing us for what we are. But I only thought of that excuse later. At the time, all I could think was, not her. Which I guess is proof that, you know, his killer instincts don't really work on her, because he did want to save her as well. So after this conversation, they just kind of say that they're in love with each other, or at least he at some point says, and so the lion fell in love with the lamb. So there's more physical contact, and she kind of looks up to kiss him, but then the smell of her exposed throat just kind of drives him crazy, and then he just goes, slowly, never moving his eyes from mine, he leaned toward me. Then, abruptly, but very gently, he rested his cold cheek against the hollow of the base of my throat. And then his cold marble lips pressed very softly against mine. So, at last, they kiss, and it is glorious, apparently. So after this, they take a little bit of a break of the like physical stuff, and she asks him more questions about his past, and he reveals that he was born in Chicago in 1901, and he was found by Carlosol, the dad, in 1918, and he was 17, dying of the Spanish influenza, and he was saved by Carlosol. So he also explains how his like brothers and sisters were part of this family. Emmett and Rosalie were also brought into the family by Carlosol, and then they have been together ever since, so it's like a vampire couple. Alice apparently sees things that might happen, things that are coming. So she saw Jasper, so they weren't like turned by Carlosol, they were turned separately. So she saw Jasper in like her mind and saw that he was looking for like a safe family, and she also saw Carlosol and his family, that they were a safe space. So Alice went to Jasper, and they both went to Carlosol being like, hey, can we join this family? And they could. And then he also mentions that Alice doesn't know anything about her like life before she was turned into a vampire. So I'm curious to see if we get like more information about that in any of the other books. So they go back home to Bella's house, and when they arrive, he reveals that he spied on her while she was sleeping almost every night since they met. Creepy, even for a vampire. Like that's too far. Because he also just casually in conversation mentions things like, I could reach out, meaning to touch your face, and crush your skull by mistake. Also, they just decide that he is her boyfriend now, because at some point he just goes, so are you going to introduce me to your dad by saying I'm your boyfriend? And she's like, I guess. And I was like, oh, guess he's her boyfriend. And the next day she goes with him to officially meet his whole family, and that's where I left off. So I will continue reading, I will come back with an update. Like I said, I have 100 pages left, so I think there will be some kind of third act conflict, because like they're together now, I guess, so what else is going to happen? Good morning, it is Sunday. I am ill, which is why I sound like this. I haven't given you a Twilight update in a little while. I actually only have about like 30 pages left. I don't really know when I gave a last big update, but basically everything that has happened since like Edward and Bella got together
feels a little bit not that important to me. Like, they spend a lot of time with Edward's family, which I appreciated because we got a lot more information about like how they became vampires, what it means to them specifically. We spent some time with the like father, and we spent some time with Alice, the sister, and I'm going to finish it right here, right now, with you. I made a new mug in ceramics class and I got to take it home yesterday, and I'm so excited. This is the first coffee I'm drinking out of it. The vampire who attacked Bella did have like information about Alice in her former life, which I thought was really interesting because we didn't know anything about Alice before she became a vampire, because she didn't know anything and he had like all this information, but I didn't really understand it, so I hope they will explain it to me because I have a lot of questions about it. Okay, I just reread that part and I think what he's trying to say, the person who turned Alice into a vampire did it to save her from the vampire who now attacks Bella. The thing that confused me is that they don't use names, so they just say him and the old one and me, and I'm like, what, who's who? But anyway, you have the vampire that attacked Bella. He was going to eat Alice when she was still a human, but she was in an insane asylum because she had the visions, and she had like shock therapy, so she wasn't really there anymore. And then a different vampire turned Alice into a vampire to save her from this dude. Alice was the only person who this dude ever wanted to eat that he didn't succeed in because she was turned into a vampire by that dude. And then this dude murdered that dude as revenge. And that is why Alice had no like family or nobody with her when she realized she was a vampire, and then came to Edward's family. Anyway, back to the part where I was at before. Her mom is visiting her at the hospital and she's like, I need to talk to you about Edward. I think he might be in love with you. So currently Bella's asking Edward why he saved her, and she's like, why didn't you just let me turn into a vampire so we could be equals? And he's like, because you have like a life, I'm not gonna turn you into a vampire. And she's like, no, but I want you to. She's like, you are my life. You're the only thing that it would hurt me to lose. She's known this man for like 6 weeks. He just said, it is possible to take bravery to the point where it becomes insanity. That is how I feel about this whole book. Like, Bella, you have to think about this. You're insane. She is comparing Edward to winning the lottery because he is like, she was like, I'm going to get old, I'm going to die, and you can like save me from that. And he's like, that's what's supposed to happen. Like, that's how life is. And she just goes, that's like going to someone who's just won the lottery, taking their money and saying, look, let's just go back to how things should be. It's better that way. And then Edward's like, I'm not a lottery prize. And she's like, no, you're better. Oh, he's taking her to prom, even though she doesn't want to go. But he's being so sweet. She's done.
So I took some time to gather my thoughts, and I am now here to give you my final thoughts about Twilight. I was genuinely quite positively surprised at how much I enjoyed this book, because I thought I would really be annoyed at the writing style, and I actually thought it was written quite well. I really understand the romance, I understand the pull between Edward and Bella, I understand if you are very young and you read this for the first time, you kind of get obsessed with their romance. I can really feel that. Obviously, this was written in a very different time, and you can really tell that this was written in like, what was it, 2003? 2005. Like, I was 5 years old when this came out, and you can clearly tell that it's almost 20 years old. So you definitely have to kind of look through that, but it is not as terrible as I expected. The main thing that I kind of fell over is how casually they keep mentioning that Edward can kill Bella, and how the way they describe it is so, like, it's a little bit problematic, and I understand that's the point, but every time something like that was said, I was like, okay, you're kind of taking me out of the romance now. The last about 100 pages were kind of irrelevant to me. Like, by the time we figured out that Edward was a vampire and also they got together, you had this whole like side quest of other vampires joining and Bella almost being turned but not really, and that whole part just kind of fell flat for me. Because I knew that she wasn't gonna be turned into a vampire in this book, and if it were to happen, I think it will happen because of Edward. So there wasn't any tension in that part for me, so it just kind of made the book longer where I didn't need to be. One thing I really appreciated about this book is that you get a lot of information about how the vampire thing actually works. Like, everything is explained. I hate it in these kinds of books when you just kind of have to accept things as they are and there's not an explanation, but in this book they really go deep into how Edward was turned into a vampire, how his whole family was turned into a vampire, the specifics of what he can and cannot do, and how like his body works. You get so much information and I love that. That was my favorite part. So in the end, I am really glad I read this book. I don't know if I would have appreciated it more or less if I would have read it when I was like a young child. It was definitely not as bad as I thought it would be. So that is the end of this video. It is probably a really long video, so if you stick to the end, thank you so much for watching. If you want me to make a video of me reading all of the other parts of the Twilight series, I definitely can do that. So please let me know. Let me know, maybe I can do more of these types of videos. I had so much fun filming this video, so I really hope you had so much fun watching it. If you did, I would love to hear from you in the comments, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye!